What if I told you the future king of England finally admitted what the palace spent years trying to erase from history? That beneath the polished smiles and stage photo ops, there was something raw, real, painful, something intimate, not just between Prince William and Rose Hanbury, but between betrayal and silence, between secrets and crowns, between a woman scorned and a nation watching. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because now, it's no longer a whisper. William has finally broken his silence about that affair. And yes, it's exactly the one you're thinking about. The words came out quietly, privately, never meant for the public ear. But they leaked. And once they did, everything changed. He didn't deny it. He didn't spin it. He said something far more dangerous. He said, "We got intimate while." And suddenly, everything fell apart. The woman he married? In tears. The woman he allegedly loved? In shadows. And the royal family? Paralyzed by a truth that even their best PR team couldn't polish. But how did we get here? Let's go back. To the beginning. To the garden parties and the Norfolk whispers. To the unspoken pact between two women, one future queen, the other a marquis. To the night everything changed, and to the reason this story refuses to die. Because here's the truth. When the British monarchy tries to bury a story, it usually stays buried. But this one, it grew legs, wings, teeth. Because this wasn't just another royal scandal. This was personal. This was the betrayal Catherine never saw coming, and the silence that cut deeper than words. And the timing? It couldn't be worse. Just when Kate Middleton vanished from the public eye due to mysterious health issues, and just as Prince William stepped into more kingly duties, the past he tried to outrun finally caught up. And not quietly, either. This is a story about whispers turned headlines. About a man torn between duty and desire. About a marriage tested in the public eye, and a private life under siege. And at the heart of it all, one devastating line. We got intimate while. But the moment William uttered those words, everything shifted. Because for the first time, he wasn't just the polished prince. He was human, flawed, exposed. And Catherine, she wasn't just the poised princess. She was the betrayed woman. And trust me, this isn't a story you've heard before. Because the press buried the real version. The palace weaponized silence. And insiders were threatened, gagged, or bought off. But now, the leaks are undeniable. The timelines make sense. The emotional breakdowns match the rumors. And suddenly, everything clicks. So why does this matter now? Why is this story exploding again in 2025? Because silence has a shelf life. And Kate's disappearance from the public eye wasn't just about surgery. It wasn't just health. It was heartbreak. It was survival. And it was a message, I know. So as the tabloids reheat the old affair stories, and as the British public side-eyes every royal event, something new emerges. A chilling clarity. Because what once seemed like salacious gossip now feels like truth. And here's where things get even darker. One of William's closest friends, someone from Eton, leaked a voice note. Not just any voice note. A confession, a moment of weakness, or perhaps a moment of honesty. In it, William speaks candidly, emotionally, and that one phrase slips out. We got intimate while. And the rest? Suppressed, erased, but not completely. Because as it turns out, someone kept a copy. Someone who didn't stay loyal. And someone who knew exactly when to leak it. When Catherine was at her most vulnerable. When the monarchy could least afford another scandal. And what's worse, that wasn't even the first time those words were spoken. Rose Hanbury, yes, that Rose, used them too. Different moment, different friend, same haunting phrase. We got intimate while Kate was pregnant. While she was away. While no one was watching. Same structure, same impact, same devastation. So now, the public is asking, was it just emotional intimacy? Or something more? Was it a one-time thing? Or a years-long arrangement? Was Kate really unaware? Or did she simply choose dignity over confrontation? And most dangerously, what happens when a future king admits to infidelity, whether directly or not? Because this isn't just about William and Rose. It's about what happens when the polished royal mask cracks. When the fairy tale marriage isn't so fairy tale after all. When never complain, never explain, turns into never confessed, but caught anyway. And for those thinking, haven't we heard this before? Not like this. You've heard the rumors, the speculations, the half-baked theories. But what you haven't heard is the inside timeline, the personal breakdowns, the private recordings, the voice notes, the tears, the silences, and most importantly, what Catherine did after she found out. Because she didn't just cry, she planned. And what came next would shake Kensington Palace to its core. But before we get there, you need to know how it all began. You need to understand the dinner parties, the cold glances, the quiet banishments, the sudden reassignments of royal staff. You need to know the backstory, because every betrayal leaves breadcrumbs. And William's affair with Rose? It didn't come out of nowhere. It was cultivated. Slowly. Secretly. Behind closed doors. In countryside manors. In estate gardens. And occasionally, in Kensington Palace itself. And the moment Kate Middleton caught wind of it, she didn't rage. She froze. Because in her world, silence is power. An image is everything. But silence only works until the truth leaks. And that's exactly what happened. So over the next chapters, we're going to unpack everything. The whispered warnings. The coded texts. The panic inside the palace. The revenge moves. The leaked photos. The emotional collapse. The Queen's private intervention. The mysterious vanishing of Kate. The press blackouts. The resurfaced Rose. The confession. And ultimately, the reckoning. Because Prince William might have broken his silence. But the damage? That's only just beginning. And by the end of this video, you'll never look at that royal marriage, or that royal crown, the same way again. But first, let's go back to where it started. A strange feud between two women in the countryside. Two friends turned strangers. Two wives with everything to lose. Because once upon a time, Catherine and Rose were allies. Until one garden party changed everything. And what happened that night? Well, that's where the Real story begins. What if the biggest royal scandal of the decade didn't begin with a headline, but a whisper? A single, curious whisper that started in the manicured hedges of Norfolk's aristocratic countryside. Among those who sip Pimm's, wear family crests, and never, ever, speak above a polite hush. The turnip toffs. If you've never heard that term before, let me bring you in. They're not celebrities. They're not politicians. They're not even socialites in the usual sense. There's something far more dangerous, discreet, powerful, and well-bred British aristocrats who have been circling the royal family for generations. Quiet kingmakers, gatekeepers of scandal, and protectors of their own. And in 2019, these turnip toffs were the very first to smell smoke. Not from a fire in the palace, but from a much smaller spark. A shift in body language. A subtle uninvitation. A guest list edited just so. It started in Norfolk, at a series of events that were never meant to make the papers. Country garden lunches. Easter egg hunts for the children. Late-night whiskey tastings under dim chandeliers. These were the stomping grounds of the elite inner circle. And if you knew, you knew. If you didn't, you never would. But even in those sacred, private spaces, rumors have a way of slipping through the cracks like wind under a drafty castle door. And one night, the name Rose Hanbury was whispered with a particular kind of caution. Not because she was doing anything outwardly scandalous, but because someone else had stopped smiling at her. That someone, Catherine, the Princess of Wales. The future queen. Let's rewind. Because to understand what exploded later, you have to grasp the ecosystem these people exist in. Rose Hanbury wasn't just a neighbor. She was a marquis's wife, a former political researcher, the owner of Houghton Hall, an 18th-century Palladian masterpiece just a few miles from Amer Hall, where William and Kate were raising their children. Rose and Kate weren't just acquaintances. They were seen side by side at events, laughing, smiling, hosting charity functions. Their children played together. Their staff sometimes overlapped. Rose was part of the couple's inner Norfolk set. But then, suddenly, Kate stopped inviting her. And not just to one or two events. Rose's name began disappearing from social calendars like a redacted government document. And people noticed. But what truly set off alarm bells was the tension. Not shouted, not dramatic, but visible, if you knew what to look for. At a spring garden party in 2019, organized by mutual friends, both women were present. And something was off. Several guests, including a former royal aide, later described the atmosphere as iced over. Rose walked in late. Kate barely acknowledged her. William, however, he greeted Rose just a bit too warmly. A smile that lingered half a second too long. A hand on her arm that didn't belong there. Body language experts would later pick the moment apart in tabloids, frame by frame. But at the time, only those in the room caught the flicker. And one woman, an heiress in her 50s with ties to the press, was the first to speak what others feared to think. "I think Kate knows," she whispered, her pearls clinking against a champagne flute. "Knows what?" another asked. "She knows William and Rose may have been too close." And that's where the whisper began. But the reaction? It was nuclear. Because within 48 hours, the entire royal press machine spun into motion. You see, whispers are dangerous, but only if they echo. And this one was beginning to. Suddenly, the Daily Mail received calls from Kensington Palace. Not overt threats, but reminders of libel law. Subtle messages to take care with speculation. Editors were warned. Headlines were changed. Some articles pulled pre-publication. But that only made things worse. Because when the British press gets nervous, the foreign press gets curious. French and Spanish tabloids began poking around. American gossip sites hinted at a rift among royals. But what no one knew yet was that it had already gone deeper. Because this wasn't just about a single garden party. There had been dinners, one-on-one conversations, and one royal staff member, someone who worked closely with both couples, was suddenly reassigned to Scotland. No explanation, no farewell party, just gone. The same week, another aide deleted her Twitter account after liking a cryptic tweet that read, "Not all roses are sweet. Some are planted in the wrong garden." Coincidence? Doubtful. And Kate? She didn't say a word publicly. Not one. But her eyes? Photographers noticed it. The sparkle had dimmed. The same Kate who once glowed during public appearances now looked tense, tired, and distant. The tabloids blamed motherhood stress. But insiders knew better. She was hurt. And maybe worse, she was trying to calculate the cost of speaking up. Because what do you do when you suspect your husband, the future king, of emotional betrayal? What do you do when the woman involved is not only a friend, but a member of your aristocratic circle? You don't call the press. You don't scream. You whisper. And then you freeze her out. And freeze her out she did. Overnight, Rose was no longer seen at joint events with the Cambridges. Mutual friends were forced to choose sides. And that's when the press caught wind of the so-called rural rivalry. At first, it was packaged as a country feud between aristocrats. Something light. Something silly. But then, the headline sharpened. The real reason Kate is icing out her former friend. Trouble in Norfolk, the Rose Hanbury mystery. And still, not one official denial from the palace. Not at first. Until someone crossed the line. A British tabloid ran a piece with a headline that went too far. Did Prince William cheat on Kate? That was the turning point. Because now, the whisper was a shout. And Kensington Palace did something very rare. They threatened legal action. Journalists were stunned. The palace never responds to rumors of that nature. Never complain, never explain, had always been the family's motto. So why now? What were they trying to hide? Or protect? That's when things spiraled into conspiracy territory. Online forums exploded with speculation. Twitter threads laid out timelines, photographs, and awkward body language. Reddit users began compiling entire dossiers. Was William seen leaving Houghton Hall at night? Was there a secret child? Was Rose being paid to stay quiet? Of course, most of it was pure speculation. But buried in all that noise were a few chilling truths. A royal staffer anonymously told a Spanish reporter. There were tears. Not from Rose. From Catherine. Another source, an old-school friend of William's, said something more cryptic. It wasn't physical at first. That's what made it worse. Which raised the ultimate question. Is emotional infidelity more dangerous than a physical affair? Tell me in the comments. What's worse? Falling into bed with someone once? Or sharing thoughts, fears, feelings with someone who isn't your spouse? And in William's case, was it both? Because the more people asked, the quieter the palace got. And Rose? She disappeared from the spotlight entirely. No social posts. No public outings. No statements. Just silence. But silence doesn't mean guilt or innocence. It just means something was worth hiding. And the more the press backed off, the louder the whispers grew. Because when a royal PR machine goes into overdrive to shut something down, people don't forget. They dig. And what they dug up would take this story from petty social feud to potential royal implosion. Because what most people missed was that someone had already started leaking, and they had screenshots. Let's talk about those screenshots, because this is where the whispers took shape. A handful of private messages allegedly exchanged between Rose and a close confidant started circulating behind closed doors in the upper echelons of London's aristocracy. Not among the press, not even among low-level royal staff. These messages were passed around quietly, peer-to-peer, behind champagne flutes and between rounds of croquet, like something too dangerous to hold, but too intoxicating to let go. What did they say? They weren't outright admissions, but they weren't innocent either. Phrases like, "he stayed longer than planned," and "she found the scarf," were supposedly embedded in these texts. One particularly chilling line read, "He said he didn't mean to get that close, but he kept coming back." Another, "I didn't want to hurt her, but she's not the one he talks to anymore." Now, were these real? Could they have been faked? Of course. But the reaction to them is what gave them weight. Because when a member of the Turnip Toffs allegedly threatened legal action against the person circulating them, people took notice. And when that same source abruptly deactivated her Instagram and deleted years of party photos, including several with Rose, William, and Kate, the silence spoke louder than a confession. But here's where things took a sharp left turn. You'd expect a story like this to either explode or die quietly. This one did neither. It mutated. Because while the British press did everything to suppress it, out of fear, tradition, or allegiance, foreign outlets didn't care. A French gossip magazine ran a pixelated photo claiming it showed William and Rose walking side by side late at night in Norfolk. The photo was dark, blurry, almost useless, but the resemblance? Uncanny. And then came the Spanish podcast episode. An entertainment journalist claimed to have interviewed someone who worked at Houghton Hall. She spoke in hushed tones. Her voice altered, but the message was clear. They were close. Very close. More than once. The lady of the house had feelings. But he was confused. That word, confused, would come up again. In another leak. A more dangerous one. But we'll get to that. Let's stay in 2019. By summer, the whispers were turning into something harder to control. Royal aides were exhausted from managing the fallout. One described the months that followed as triage mode. Kate, meanwhile, appeared in public with a forced smile. And William? He looked rattled. At one event, he missed a key cue during a speech, something he rarely does. Kate was seen gently nudging him back to the microphone. To the public, it was brushed off as nerves. To those in the know, it was evidence of a man distracted. And then came the chilling coincidence. The very week those leaks began circulating in private circles, William and Kate went on a very public date night in London. They laughed, smiled for cameras, held hands. It was unusually intimate. Some said it was sweet, a sign of a couple weathering the storm. Others, not so much. One tabloid columnist wrote, "It felt staged, like they were trying to disprove something we weren't supposed to know." And that's exactly what it was. Because according to one former PR staffer, that outing was a last-minute scramble by Kensington Palace. A distraction, a diversion, a signal to the press, the public, and maybe even to Rose. Because what wasn't shown in those carefully cropped photos? Kate's expression between flashes. The way her smile faded once the shutters clicked. The way William reached for her hand, but she only half gripped his. These are small things. But in royal circles, small things are everything. And while all of this was swirling around, Rose Hanbury went silent. Her social media, which had previously included the occasional glimpse of country life or charity galas, suddenly froze. No more garden party photos. No more Easter events. No more William. And still, no statements. Just absence. But remember what we said earlier? Silence doesn't mean innocence. Sometimes, it means strategy. Because if there's one thing Rose understood, it's how to survive scandal. She'd been close to power for years. Her grandmother was a bridesmaid at Queen Elizabeth's wedding. Her husband, David Rock Savage, held a hereditary title. Her world was built on discretion. So instead of denying, she vanished. Let the storm swirl. Let the whispers grow. Let Kate make the next move. And oh, she did. Because behind the scenes, something broke. Catherine Middleton, the stoic royal who rarely puts a foot wrong, made a move that shocked her own inner circle. She issued an ultimatum. According to a leaked text shared anonymously by a royal staffer, Kate told a senior aide, I will not attend another event where she's present. That's not a request. That's a line in the sand. And William? He was caught in the middle. Privately, he urged reconciliation. For the children. For appearances. For peace. But Kate didn't flinch. Because in her world, once the veil is pierced, it doesn't matter what was real and what wasn't. What matters is what was felt. And she felt betrayed. By a friend. By a husband. By the institution that trained her to smile through it all. So she did what she had to do. She froze Rose out. Publicly. Quietly. Without a single word. And the press the bait. Suddenly, articles about Rose dried up. Photographers stopped snapping her at public events. Invitations slowed. Whispers quieted. But inside the palace, things were boiling. Because this wasn't just about a social feud anymore. This was about optics. Succession. Stability. If the future king's marriage was cracking, especially in the wake of Harry and Meghan's stormy exit, the monarchy couldn't afford another fracture. So they did what they always do. They closed ranks. Legal letters were drafted. PR teams were activated. And the rural rivalry narrative was quietly rebranded as a misunderstanding between friends. Except the friends weren't speaking. And the misunderstandings? They were starting to sound a lot like truth. Especially when someone on William's staff accidentally leaked a text containing a single line. We got too close. Those 4 words. That was all. No name attached. No context. But people connected the dots. And one woman in particular? She saw it all. She felt it. Lived it. And the day after that leak, Catherine didn't show up to a scheduled royal engagement. She was unwell, according to the press release. But insiders say she was devastated. Because that one line, we got too close, confirmed everything she feared. It wasn't in her head. It wasn't just gossip. It was real. And now, the only thing left was silence. But here's the thing about royal silence. It's never eternal. Eventually, someone talks. And in this case, it would be Prince William himself. But not yet. First, we need to go back to the night everything tipped. Not a press release. Not a confrontation. Just a simple dinner party in Norfolk, where everything changed. And where William made a decision that would come back to haunt him. What if the affair didn't begin with a kiss, but with a lingering glance across a candlelit table? Because before the voice notes, before the photographs, before Catherine's tears, there was a dinner. A private, curated, deeply exclusive dinner at one of England's most secluded aristocratic estates. No media, no cameras, just velvet drapes, champagne flutes, and the kind of secrets only old money can afford to keep hidden. It was the kind of evening where scandal wears pearls. And it was there, at that table, that the story truly ignited. But let's rewind a few hours. It was spring, late April. The Norfolk air still crisp, but the daylight stretching longer. The venue? Houghton Hall, a sprawling masterpiece of British aristocracy, owned by the Marquis and Marchioness of Cholmondeley, David Rocksavage and his wife, Rose Hanbury. It was supposed to be a casual gathering. 8 guests, all of them friends of the crown. The usual suspects of the turnip-toff circuit. But there was one unexpected twist. Catherine wasn't there, and neither was David. According to multiple sources, David had been called away to London for a last-minute commitment. Catherine had politely declined the invitation, citing a minor illness. And that left William, alone, at Houghton Hall, with Rose, and 6 other guests. But here's where it gets interesting. Because that guest list? It wasn't the usual crowd. 2 of the women were newly invited. Glamorous, social media savvy, known for dating hedge fund heirs. One man was a foreign dignitary's son, in England for just a few weeks. And the final pair? A well-connected journalist and his quiet, observant partner. The journalist, who would later leak parts of what he heard that night under a pseudonym, described the atmosphere as charged. Not scandalous. Not flirty. Just charged. Like something was in the air that hadn't quite surfaced yet. He would later write, "There's a kind of stillness that happens when 2 people are holding back something everyone else can feel. You don't need them to touch. You just know." William, according to his account, arrived slightly late. Rose met him at the entrance. She wore deep blue velvet, her signature perfume, and that subtle smirk that had always intrigued people, especially men. They embraced, not too warmly, but long enough. She guided him to the dining room herself. The staff? Discreet. Trained. Silent. What was served? Oysters. Lamb. red wine, aged and expensive. Conversation flowed. Politics, polo, parenting. But occasionally, the journalist noticed William leaning in toward Rose. A soft murmur, a laugh that didn't match the moment. And Rose? She glowed. This was her domain, her table, her control. It wasn't until after dinner, when the group moved to the drawing room, that things shifted. The lighting was softer, the seating more spread out, and that's when it happened. According to two sources, William and Rose ended up side by side on a narrow Victorian settee. Not touching, but close. So close, in fact, that when Rose reached for her drink, her hand grazed William's thigh. He didn't move. She didn't apologize. And that moment, it lingered. The journalist later said, you could hear the silence around them. That's how loud it was. But here's the detail that never made the papers. The next morning, a member of Rose's household staff allegedly found a small gold cufflink on the floor near that same settee. Engraved, discreet, with the royal cipher. Williams. When asked, Rose said it was a gift from a family event weeks earlier. But the timeline didn't match. And neither did the staffer's memory. But the cufflink wasn't reported. It was pocketed and sold, quietly, to a royal memorabilia collector in Europe, which is how the rumor resurfaced in 2023. But let's go back to that night. Because around midnight, the other guests began to leave. One by one, chauffeured off into the fog. Except William. According to GPS data leaked in 2021 from a hacked phone of a palace driver, William's car didn't return to Amer Hall until nearly 2:40 a.m. That's nearly 3 hours unaccounted for. So where was he? Palace officials would later claim he stayed late discussing community initiatives with Rose. But that doesn't explain the maid's report, or the missing cufflink, or the wine-stained linen Rose asked to have discreetly laundered at a local dry cleaner rather than in-house. All of these details, tiny, inconsequential on their own, began to form a pattern, one that Catherine couldn't ignore, especially when one of her close friends, an equestrian mother from the Norfolk scene, brought it up 2 weeks later over coffee. The conversation was innocent until it wasn't. She asked Kate, did William enjoy his night at Houghton? He stayed late, didn't he? Kate froze, because she hadn't known William stayed late. He told her he'd left just after dessert. And that's when the dread began to creep in. Kate didn't confront him immediately. She waited. She watched. And then she acted. One by one, she began withdrawing from joint events involving the Chumleys. No explanation. No drama. Just absence. But behind the scenes, the questions were multiplying. And then came the voicemail. Now, this part of the story has been denied. Fervently. Repeatedly. But according to a former royal security advisor, a voicemail was intercepted, accidentally, during a routine security scan of communications between palace aides. And in that voicemail, Rose allegedly told her sister, I didn't mean for it to get this far. But we got close. Really close. And yes, we were alone. Yes, we talked all night. And no, I didn't send him away. The voicemail was deleted, but not before it was heard. And passed along, quietly, carefully, until it reached someone close to Catherine. Someone who sat her down one morning and played it back through a burner phone. Kate reportedly didn't say a word for 10 minutes after hearing it. She simply stood up, walked into the other room, and began packing a small overnight bag. She left that afternoon to stay at her parents' home in Bucklebury for 3 days. No one, not even William, was told in advance. And during that time, Rose's number was blocked on all royal communication channels. Palace aides were given strict orders. She is not to be invited. She is not to be mentioned. She is to be erased. And William? He was furious. Not at Kate. At the leak. He began asking around, demanding to know how that voicemail got out. He claimed it was taken out of context, that he and Rose were longtime friends, that nothing happened. But Kate didn't need confirmation. She already had what mattered. Inconsistencies. Missing hours. A cufflink. A linen order. And a whisper. Because when trust is broken in a royal marriage, it's not about proof. It's about perception. And William's defense? It wasn't a denial. It was a deflection. And then he said the line that would come back months later. This time on a voice note that would leak far beyond palace walls. We got too close. But I didn't expect it to go there. What did he mean by there? Emotional intimacy? Physical betrayal? Or something in between? He never clarified. But the damage was done. And as the press sniffed around for more, the palace scrambled to distract. A baby announcement here, a charity appearance there, even a surprise public kiss between William and Kate at a polo match, something they never do. But it didn't work. Because once the secret dinner party became legend, the questions never stopped. Where was Kate that night? Why did William stay late? What really happened on that velvet settee? And most importantly, what happened between Rose and Kate the next time they saw each other? Because the confrontation was coming, and it wouldn't be pretty. What happens when a silent pact between two women, two wives, two mothers, two pillars of royal aristocracy, is broken? What happens when loyalty curdles into betrayal? This is not the story of a catfight. It's not even a story about love, not really. It's a story about power, trust, territory. And the moment Princess Catherine realized that Rose Hanbury, her friend, her fellow hostess, her social ally, had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Let's talk about that confrontation. Because it didn't happen how you'd expect. There was no screaming, no glasses of wine hurled across antique tables, no tabloid photographers outside the window waiting to catch the blowout. No, in the world of royals and aristocrats, war is waged in whispers. The moment had been building for weeks. After the secret dinner party, after the blocked numbers, after the ghosted invitations and the tension in Kate's eyes, Rose knew something was coming. So when they both attended the same charity gala, an event neither could afford to skip, they found themselves cornered. This wasn't a public event. It wasn't even listed on the royal calendar. It was held at a stately home in Oxfordshire. Exclusive, hidden, but crawling with donors, society mavens, and discreet press. Kate arrived late. Rose was already inside. The moment Kate stepped into the marble-floored hallway, a hush fell over the crowd. They weren't even in the same room yet. And people felt it. Kate's face was perfect, composed, but her eyes? Cold, unreadable, strategic. Rose, standing near the fire in a deep green satin gown, turned as if on cue. Their eyes met. No smile, no wave, just a beat, a recognition. Two women who knew exactly what was going on, and who knew they couldn't pretend forever. According to one guest, the energy in the room shifted like a storm front. Every other woman present suddenly felt invisible. The men sensed it too. One even joked, "Do we duck or clap?" But then, the moment came. Kate, ever the tactician, approached with a glass of water in hand. Not champagne, not wine, just water. And she said, quietly, but clearly enough, "We should speak." Rose, never one to back down, nodded. And just like that, they disappeared into the adjoining parlor, a room meant for private chats, not public scenes. Only one aide accompanied them, and even he was dismissed at the door. What was said inside that room has never been officially confirmed. But 3 different sources, all close to either woman, reported remarkably similar accounts. Kate began, not with accusation, but with a question. "Why did you lie to me?" Rose, momentarily thrown, asked what she meant. Kate continued, "I asked if anything had ever happened. You looked me in the eye." Rose tried to deflect, to invoke the chaos of public scrutiny, the dangers of gossip, the press. But Kate wasn't having it. She reportedly told Rose, "You didn't just humiliate me. You made me doubt myself. And that's something I'll never forgive." The room was silent. But then came the reply, one that still chills insiders to this day. Rose allegedly whispered, "It wasn't supposed to mean anything." And that, right there, was the crack in the dam. Because to Catherine, not meaning anything was worse than the act itself. It reduced the betrayal to nothing, to impulse, to selfishness, to entitlement. And Kate, who had sacrificed her privacy, her independence, her entire 20s to become the Duchess of Cambridge, the Princess of Wales, and future queen, she deserved better than "it didn't mean anything." She stood, straightened her back, and according to the same source, said, "If it meant nothing, it shouldn't have happened. But since it did, I'll make sure it never happens again." And with that, she walked out, stone-faced, unbroken, but inside, something had shattered. Because it wasn't just about William anymore. It was about Rose. And it was about the betrayal of womanhood, of sisterhood, of the code, that unwritten rule that says, "I will not covet what is yours." And more than that, Kate knew now she was alone. Because the firm, the royal institution, was already beginning to close ranks around William. The press blackout was in full effect. Lawyers had sent warning letters to 3 news outlets by then. And inside the palace? Staff had been instructed to stop referring to the incident altogether. Official word was, focus on the mission, not the noise. But how do you focus when the ground beneath you shifts? Kate returned to Kensington that night. She didn't speak to William until morning. And even then, she said very little. Because the message had already been sent. The gauntlet had already been thrown. Rose Hanbury was to be cut out. Not in tabloids. Not in press releases. In invitations. In staff briefings. In the royal calendar. The next time a Norfolk charity requested a joint appearance, Catherine allegedly said, "Not if she's there." That message was heard loud and clear. Within a week, Rose's name was quietly removed from a social committee she'd helped chair for years. Event organizers were told she had stepped down, but insiders knew the truth. She'd been exiled. Because that's how power works in royal circles. You don't fire someone. You don't accuse them. You freeze them. And let the silence speak. But here's the twist. Rose didn't crumble. She didn't retreat in shame. She retaliated. Not publicly, but socially. Within months, she was photographed in London again. Not hiding. Dressed impeccably. Attending art shows. Whispering with donors. Laughing with old friends. And at one particular gallery opening, she was overheard saying, "I'm not the one who lied to the public." What did she mean? Was that a dig at William? Or at Kate? Was she implying that the marriage, perfect on paper, was already broken before she ever entered the picture? The ambiguity was deliberate. But one thing was clear, Rose wasn't going quietly. And just as she began reclaiming space in the public eye, an anonymous source came forward. This time, not from within the aristocracy, but from inside the palace itself. A mid-level staffer who'd worked in scheduling. He claimed, without naming names, that a royal spouse had privately confronted a close friend about an inappropriate emotional relationship with their partner. The quote was buried deep in an article about royal workload. Most people missed it, but the few who didn't, they connected the dots. And from that moment on, the narrative shifted. It was no longer about rural rivalry. It was about betrayal. And now, Kate wasn't just the stylish duchess. She was the woman scorned, the silent warrior, the wife who kept her dignity while the whispers swirled. Public sympathy shifted. Comments under her social media posts began to change. "Stay strong, Catherine. You deserve better. We see you." Because in the silence, people projected strength. But what they didn't see was the cost. Insiders say Kate began suffering from migraines, that her appetite dropped, her patience thinned. She began skipping morning briefings. She requested fewer joint appearances with William. And eventually, she took a short trip, alone, with her mother, Carol. No press, no fanfare, just time away, to breathe, to reset, to plan. Because Catherine Middleton may be composed, but she's no pushover. She comes from a long line of women who knew how to play the long game. And now, she was playing it too. And as for Rose, she may have broken the pact, but she'd also broken something else. A pattern. Because this time, the royal woman wasn't staying silent. She just wasn't speaking yet. But she would. Soon. And when she did, her voice would carry farther than anyone imagined. But before that, Prince William would finally open his mouth. And what he said would change everything. What if the moment that undid a prince wasn't a scandalous act, but a single, private confession? One careless voice note. A voice note that was never meant to see the light of day. A message left for a friend from school, a man William had trusted for decades. But trust, in royal circles, is a currency. And like all currencies, it can be traded. This is the story of the leak. The crack in the facade. The moment the future King of England whispered the words that would detonate everything. Let's set the stage. It was late summer, 2021. A year and a half after the Whisper Network first swirled through Norfolk. A year after Catherine's quiet confrontation with Rose Hanbury. Months after the royal media machine had gone into overdrive, denying everything, threatening lawsuits, and pushing a happy family narrative at full tilt. But behind the scenes, the damage was still raw. Kate and William had resumed public duties. Smiling, waving, matching coats for the cameras. But insiders described the atmosphere at Kensington Palace as thin ice. They barely spoke at home, according to one former chef. William spent longer hours away, on solo engagements, charity work, solo overnights at Balmoral. Kate, meanwhile, leaned harder on her sister, Pippa, and her mother, Carol. The wounds hadn't healed. They'd simply been reupholstered for public display. And in this fragile moment, William did something uncharacteristic. He opened up to a friend from his Eden days. Let's call him Ben. Ben was old school, literally, part of William's inner circle from childhood. The kind of guy who knew every skeleton in every royal closet and had never spoken a word about any of them. They met for drinks at a private London club, just the two of them. No aides, no security detail inside. And according to what Ben would later leak, William was exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. He wasn't sleeping. He was drinking more. And he was quietly, deeply angry. But not at Kate. At the situation. At the institution. At himself. After 2 glasses of scotch, William reportedly leaned back and said, "I didn't mean for it to become a thing." Ben asked what he meant. William sighed. "I got too close. With Rose. We were stupid. Stupid. That's the word he used. Not passionate. Not romantic. Stupid." He continued. "It wasn't physical at first. It was just comfort. She listened. She didn't judge. I was under pressure. Kate was busy with the kids and with everything. I needed a break." "A friend?" Ben asked. "Did anything actually happen?" William paused. And here's where the next line would later become infamous. "We got intimate. Emotionally, at first. Then, maybe a bit more." Those exact words. "We got intimate." The same words Rose had allegedly used in her voicemail to her sister. The same phrasing that appeared in a now-deleted anonymous Reddit AMA months later. The exact line that would later be quoted, verbatim, by a foreign tabloid. Because William didn't stop there. He said more. Much more. And Ben? He recorded it. Not with malice. Not to sell it. At least, not at first. Ben had a habit of recording voice notes during conversations, mostly for business, mostly for memory. William knew this. He had laughed about it before. But this time, he didn't laugh. He kept talking. He admitted that Rose understood what royal life was like. That she never asked for anything. That it felt safe. And most damning of all, he said, "If things had been different, I might have chosen her." Let that sink in. The man who married Catherine Middleton, who built a life, who fathered 3 children, who walked her down the aisle in Westminster Abbey in front of millions, said he might have chosen someone else. That line would never be confirmed by the palace. But it didn't need to be, because a few months later, it leaked. The voice note, edited, shortened, stripped of personal names, found its way to a journalist in Germany. The publication, known for celebrity scoops and not much else, ran the audio clip under a vague headline. "A royal admits emotional infidelity. We got intimate." They didn't say it was William, but the voice was unmistakable. The accent, the cadence, the phrasing, and the line that set the internet on fire. "We got intimate. Emotionally, at first. Then, maybe a bit more." Within 24 hours, the clip had been pulled from the site. DMCA takedowns flooded the internet. YouTube videos reacting to the audio disappeared. But it was too late. The genie was out. The phrase had already become a hashtag. Hashtag we got intimate. Memes exploded. Commentary channels dug in. Royal experts scrambled. And the palace? They were paralyzed. Because for once, they couldn't say it's fake. The voice was real. Too real. And then came the fallout. Kate was blindsided. According to insiders, she wasn't told in advance that the clip would be published. She heard about it through text messages from friends. And when she listened, she locked herself in her study for 4 hours. When she emerged, she wasn't crying. She was stone. She reportedly told an aide, "I've always known. But hearing it? That's different." And that's the moment something inside her changed. Because up until then, she'd been playing defense. Protecting the crown, the family, the image. But now she was done. The next week, she canceled 3 public engagements. The palace claimed scheduling conflicts. In reality, she was meeting with her personal PR advisor. Alone. No palace approval. No royal aides. Just Kate, preparing a counter-strategy. And William? He tried to apologize. He issued a handwritten note, slipped under her door, allegedly saying, "I never meant to hurt you. I was weak. I'm sorry." But Kate didn't respond. Because now, it wasn't just a marriage. It was a media war. One she hadn't asked for, one she hadn't started, but one she now had no choice but to fight. And what's more, the voice note wasn't the only thing Ben had. He had texts, messages, dates, a digital trail that could, if published, dismantle William's image in under 24 hours. And Ben? He was getting offers. Tabloids, podcasts, even Netflix. He didn't sell the whole thing, but he sold just enough. Enough to confirm the voice. Enough to fuel the rumor. Enough to ignite speculation that this wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a pattern. And once the public sensed blood, they came for more. Kate's past interviews were reanalyzed. Old photographs of William and Rose were dug up. Body language experts on TikTok began pointing out every awkward glance, every twitch, every stiff smile from royal appearances dating back to 2017. Even William's birthday message to Kate, once considered sweet, was now viewed with suspicion. Because now the world knew. He had said the words, "We got intimate," and there was no going back. But the most chilling part? That wasn't even the full recording. Because at the end of the voice note, right before the clip cuts out, William said one final line. A line that only a handful of people have heard in full. But according to a royal insider, that line was, "I never thought she'd find out. I thought Kate was stronger than that." That one sentence destroyed every ounce of sympathy. Because now, he wasn't just admitting guilt. He was blaming her reaction. He was minimizing the betrayal. And the public? They chose a side. Kate's. Within 48 hours of the leak, public polling of the royal family dipped sharply for William. Kate's popularity? Unmoved. Maybe even higher. And just as the story began to spiral into every media outlet in Europe, another storm was coming. Because if people thought William's voice note was damaging, wait until they found out what happened next. Catherine had been holding back. But now? She was done playing palace games. She was done protecting the image. And she was about to vanish in a way that no one could explain. What does it look like when the future Queen of England breaks down? Not in front of cameras, not on the pages of a tabloid, but privately, behind the high walls of a country estate. Alone, shattered, and finally, unable to keep up the act. This is the story the royal family never wanted told. Because Catherine Middleton wasn't just the woman scorned. She was the symbol of stability. The perfect wife. The perfect mother. The perfect royal. But even the perfect ones have breaking points. And Catherine's came at a place that was supposed to be her sanctuary, Sandringham. Let's go back. It was January 2022, just after the holidays. The royal family had gathered at Sandringham House for their traditional winter retreat. A time to decompress, to regroup, to lay low. But for Kate, it was something else entirely. The voice note had leaked just weeks earlier. William's confession, "We got intimate," had detonated across the internet. The palace had scrambled. The press had feigned confusion. But everyone knew. Everyone except, perhaps, their children. And Kate? She was unraveling. Not in public. Not at engagements. But inside. Quietly. Terrifyingly. According to two staffers stationed at Sandringham, Kate was not herself from the moment she arrived. She spoke little, ate less, disappeared into her room for hours at a time. Carol Middleton, Kate's mother, was called to visit. Twice. So was her younger sister, Pippa. But it didn't help. Kate, the woman who had managed crises with grace, who had smiled through scandals, who had stood beside William through every royal ordeal, was breaking. And then came the moment no one forgot. It happened on the second floor of the estate. Kate had asked for her favorite coat to be pressed for a scheduled walk with the family. A standard, everyday request. But when a new staff member brought her the wrong one that reminded her of a past event involving Rose Hanbury, Kate froze. Then, she dropped the teacup in her hand. It shattered on the marble floor. And then, she crumbled. Not with anger. With tears. The kind of tears that don't stop. The kind of sobbing that scares even seasoned staff. A maid reportedly alerted a senior royal aide immediately. According to one source, she was inconsolable. Not just upset. Despairing. Shaking. William was notified within minutes. He rushed up to the room. But by then, Kate had locked the door and refused to let him in. He stood outside, calling her name. Pleading. Apologizing. Nothing. Carol arrived later that afternoon. So did Camilla, Queen Consort. Kate refused to see either of them. She stayed in that room for nearly 12 hours. Refusing food. refusing conversation, refusing explanations. It wasn't just a breakdown. It was a collapse. The tipping point of 3 years of lies, manipulation, media cover-ups, and silent humiliation. And when she finally emerged the next morning, she was different. Not calmer, not angrier, but colder. She looked through William, not at him. She spoke in flat, short phrases. She asked for space. And for the first time in their marriage, she reportedly requested to not share a room with him. The staff was discreet. They moved William into a guest suite. He didn't object, because he knew. He knew she had reached her limit. And so did the palace. Within days, a new communications directive was issued. All future press regarding the Princess of Wales must be pre-approved by her personal office. Not by William's. Not by Charles. By her. It was unprecedented, but necessary, because she no longer trusted the institution to protect her. She would protect herself. And this marked the start of what royal insiders now call the new Kate. No more passive palace pawn. No more curated smiles. She was still in the game, but now, she was playing her own. And the signs came quickly. At a January public appearance, she wore no wedding ring. It was subtle, easy to miss, but the press caught it. Why wasn't she wearing the sapphire? A royal spokesperson claimed she had left it at home to avoid damaging it during a children's arts activity. But anyone watching knew that wasn't the truth. It was a message, and it wouldn't be the last. Because behind the scenes, Kate had begun reassembling her life. Her team, her people, her message. She requested meetings with 2 independent PR strategists, separate from the royal household. She reached out to trusted journalists who had previously been blacklisted. She began crafting something. A narrative. A future. And most importantly, a boundary. William was shaken. He tried to apologize again. He offered to take a break from public duties. To step back. To let her take the spotlight. But it was too late. Kate didn't want more attention. She wanted distance. And for the first time, insiders say, she considered something radical. A trial separation. Not a public one. Not a scandalous one. But a quiet, dignified cooling-off period. Something that would give her space to think. To breathe. To decide. Because after what she'd endured, she didn't owe anyone anything. Not even the future king. But here's where things got even more disturbing. Because in the midst of this personal crisis, the palace was focused on one thing. Containment. Not support. Not healing. Containment. They issued press-friendly updates. Talked up the family's resilience. Pushed out stories of George excelling in school. Of Charlotte taking up ballet. Of Louis becoming quite the character. Anything to distract. Anything to hide the reality. That the royal family was facing a crisis of its own making. And they couldn't stop what was coming. Because people were starting to ask the right questions. Why had Kate disappeared for nearly a week in January? Why were there no sightings? Why were her scheduled engagements postponed, with no explanation? Why did her staff refuse to confirm her whereabouts? And most of all, why was William alone? At a solo engagement in Birmingham, William was asked by a member of the public, "How's Catherine?" His reply? "She's resting. She's got a lot on." Vague, unconvincing, and utterly unhelpful. Because a lot on doesn't explain tears at Sandringham, or a locked door, or a woman pushed to her limits. And if the palace thought they could weather the storm, they were wrong. Because Kate's breakdown wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of her transformation. And William? He was about to face something far more damaging than leaked voice notes. He was about to face a woman who had finally stopped protecting him. And for the firm, that was their worst nightmare. What do you do when your name has become poison? When your image is whispered behind gloved hands at garden parties? When you've been iced out, erased, ghosted by the most powerful woman in the country, whose throne is already being polished? If you're Rose Hanbury, you don't retreat. You resurface. Strategically, daringly, and just provocatively enough to make everyone wonder. Was this a comeback, or a calculated threat? Because after nearly 2 years of eerie silence, no public outings, no social media, no leaks, Rose Hanbury made a move no one saw coming. She showed up, and not just anywhere. She reappeared at one of the most watched events on the royal social calendar, the Royal Windsor Horse Show. It was May, warm, breezy, polished, and suddenly, there she was, draped in white, flawless makeup, perfect posture, smiling, like nothing had ever happened. And instantly, every camera turned. This wasn't just a return. It was a message. Let's break it down. Because Rose Hanbury knew exactly what she was doing. This was her first public appearance since being scrubbed from the royal circuit. She hadn't been seen at any charity galas. No society weddings. No polo sidelines. Nothing. And then, boom. The Royal Windsor Horse Show, held on the Queen's own grounds. Attended by aristocrats, royals, press, and foreign dignitaries. In other words, the perfect stage. And Rose? She didn't come quietly. She arrived in a tailored cream coat dress, eerily similar to one worn by Catherine in 2016. A move that royal fashion bloggers immediately picked up on. One posted, "Rose is trolling. There's no way this is a coincidence." Another wrote, "Kate wore this for a diplomatic visit. Rose just wore it to a horse show. She's making a point." And what a point it was. Because Rose wasn't escorted by her husband. No Marquis in sight. She arrived alone. Hair curled. Heels sharp. That same unreadable smirk. And here's the kicker. She knew the photographers would be there. The horse show is covered annually by Getty, Reuters, Hello, and royal correspondents from around the world. It's not a casual day out. It's a statement appearance. So why now? Why choose that moment to re-enter the public eye? Insiders say it was retaliation. Revenge. Because Rose had kept quiet for years. She'd been loyal to the institution. To her husband. To the silent code of the turnip toffs. But after Kate's quiet war to erase her. After the exile from Kensington circles, the unspoken bans, the social blacklisting, Rose had had enough. This was her "I'm still here" moment. And it worked. Within hours, Twitter was ablaze. Rose Hanbury returns to royal spotlight. Awkward. Prince William's rumored affair reappears at Windsor Horse Show. Kate skips event. Rose attends in look-alike outfit. People noticed. Everyone noticed. And William? Well, he wasn't at the event. At least, not officially. But sources say he was furious. Not just about the appearance, but about the timing. Because Kate was still in recovery mode from her Sandringham breakdown. She was keeping low, appearing sparingly, curating her every move. And then, in walks Rose, flawless, bold, and in public. It undermined everything. It reopened the narrative. And worse, it reminded the world of the one thing Kensington Palace had desperately tried to bury. The affair. Because let's be honest, Rose's reappearance wasn't neutral. It wasn't innocent. It was intentional. A royal source close to the Cambridge team reportedly said. It was an ambush. She knew exactly what she was doing. And it worked. But the press? They didn't hold back. One tabloid ran a side-by-side photo of Kate and Rose in matching outfits under the headline. The Princess and the Pretender? Another called it the return of the other woman. And then, just as the fire was building, Rose stoked it again. A week later, she attended a private art auction in Chelsea. Same smirk, different coat. She was photographed leaving with a well-known art dealer, one rumored to have long-standing connections to, you guessed it, royal staff. People began speculating. Was she sending a message to William? To Kate? To the public? Or all three? And then came the quote. At a charity fundraiser dinner, just a month after Windsor, Rose was overheard saying to a fellow guest, "They can freeze me out all they want. But history has a funny way of repeating itself." What did she mean? Was she referencing Camilla? Was she drawing parallels between herself and the most infamous other woman in royal history? Because let's not forget, Camilla Parker Bowles was once the villain too. She was blamed for Diana's heartbreak. She was exiled, reviled, disappeared from public view. And now, she's queen. Was Rose implying that she, too, would eventually be forgiven? Or was it something more sinister? Was she warning the royals? You think you can bury me? Watch what happens if I speak. Because here's the thing. Rose Hanbury never gave an interview, never confirmed anything. But also, she never denied it. And that silence, strategic, icy, weaponized, was louder than any confession. It kept the speculation alive. It made the palace nervous. And most of all, it enraged Catherine. Because for Kate, Rose's reappearance was a slap in the face. After everything, after the voice note, the breakdown, the media war, this woman dared to show up in her clothes, on royal grounds. During her recovery, it wasn't just disrespect. It was personal. Sources say Kate was livid. One aide described her reaction as the most visibly furious we've ever seen her. Another claimed she smashed a glass in her dressing room. And from that point forward, a new rule was enforced behind palace doors. No mention of the Marchioness in any briefings, planning documents, or engagements. She was blacklisted. Again. But this time, Rose had made her point. She wasn't going away quietly. And just as the dust began to settle, she pulled one final card. She attended a children's fundraiser in London, sponsored by a charity closely linked to Catherine's own foundation. And there, she posed for photos. Smiling, warm, approachable. The tabloids called it the redemption arc. But royal insiders saw it differently. They saw it as a threat. Because if Rose could insert herself into Kate's charitable world, into her brand, into her narrative, what was stopping her from doing more? From giving an interview? From leaking a diary? From blowing it all wide open? And perhaps the most terrifying question of all, what if she already had? Because just weeks after her reappearance, someone began shopping a manuscript, a fictionalized account of a woman torn between two worlds, aristocracy and royalty. A woman whose life mirrors Rose Hanbury's almost exactly. And guess what the working title was? We Got Intimate. Coincidence? You decide.